Police Officer 1 was already in the front of the Kroger parking lot after a citizen called and asked for help after locking herself out of her car. This is a common call for police. We can see that he's using tools police carry in their car to try to open the locked car door. Police Officer 2, who had just finished with a nearby car accident, is on the scene and also tries to help unlock the citizen's car. As Officer number 2 is working, a Kroger employee approaches him from behind and points to a woman getting into her car. The Kroger employee tells Officer 2 that the woman getting into the black Lexus has just stolen things from the store. Police officers routinely may be focused on one task in a public setting, then, when abruptly interrupted, must then redirect focus to a more pressing matter. Officer number 2 quickly approaches the Lexus and attempts to talk to the suspect. He repeatedly tells her to stop and get out of the running car. It's well within the legal authority of police to temporarily stop and detain anyone believed to be part of a potential crime. Officer 1 appears to notice what his colleague is doing and walks over to assist. As Officer 2 continues to loudly tell the driver to get out of the car, Officer 1 walks past him briskly and moves around to the front of the car. Police officers are generally at greater risk either directly in front of or behind a car for obvious reasons. Drivers can drive forward or backward into the officers when they're in that most vulnerable position. While this suspect didn't have a weapon, the officers didn't know that at the time. 19 seconds into the encounter, the suspect rolls her window down a few inches and asks why she's being stopped. Officer 2 tells her that a Kroger employee has accused her of stealing. Citizens can ask why they are being detained or ordered to comply, and, in most cases, when there's time and no urgent circumstances, the officer should provide an answer, as Officer 2 does. Although she's been ordered to get out of the running car many times by now, the driver starts to turn the steering wheel to the right as Officer 1 is directly in front of the car, in a clearly vulnerable position. Officer number 1 draws his firearm and again loudly orders the woman to stop the car. Police officers are trained to draw their firearms when threatened with deadly force, which can be from a gun, a knife, or a vehicle. In the next second, the driver steps on the gas and the car moves forward. When you look at side-by-side footage from both officers' body cameras, you can see that the suspect's car pushes Officer 1 backwards several feet. It's clear from the video that the car makes contact with the officer. In the next second, you can see that both of Officer 1's feet are off the ground. At this moment, Officer 1 fires a single shot through the windshield. Officer 1 is then able to slide off the hood of the moving car as it rolls towards the building. Officers run to keep up with the moving car, and from the video, it doesn't appear that the officers would have any way of knowing whether the driver is in control of the car. When the car stops, they act quickly to get the driver out of the car, which is what they are often trained to do.
August 4th, Blendon Township's police chief John Belford says the 21-year-old was one of several people stealing alcohol. When police were alerted, officers say Young was in her vehicle and was asked several times to get out. Police then say Young put the car in gear and drove toward an officer. Chief Belford says Young was given aid on the scene, but later died from her injuries.
Family is obviously distraught. They've just seen the video of their daughter, of their granddaughter, of their mother for her young children, what we believe get killed by the police department. And I think the video is going to speak for itself. And I think you guys are going to be able to see it, and we appreciate the concern that the community has for the family. And it's just going to be, I think, a devastating video for people to see.
Next time back in service, 1828.
Get out of the car. Then get out. No, then get out. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car.
Takaya's family is heartbroken. What I can say is that the video did nothing but confirm their fears that Takaya was murdered unjustifiably. Takaya and her young daughter were murdered unjustifiably.
The car. Out of the car. They said you stole stuff, do not leave. Get out of the car. Then get out. No, then get out. Get out of the car. Get out of the car!
We found a witness who was in the store at the same time as Takaya who saw her put down bottles as she went out the store. And she never committed any theft.
Shots fired. Shots fired. Stop the car! Stop the car!
We're going to have a 34 on. Call him out. He's going to be out.
Now at 5, the family of Takaya Young calling for urgency and honesty. The young mother was killed in a shooting involving Blendon Township police just 5 days ago.
A little bit more about who Takaya Young was. Her family calls her the life of the party. She has 2 young sons, and we now know that she was pregnant with a little baby girl. But her family now is demanding transparency and accountability, saying that an alleged crime shouldn't be a death sentence.
So now August is going to be a grieving month, for a while, because she shouldn't be gone.
In tears, Takaya Young's grandmother recalls the day she was shot and killed.
It just was tragic, and it should have never, ever, ever happened.
It happened last Thursday. A Blendon Township police officer shot and killed Young in a Kroger parking lot after she was accused of stealing alcohol. Nearly a week later, her family joined their attorney, Sean Walton, demanding answers.
There are many questions that are unanswered. They're unanswered partially because we don't know the identity of this officer. We don't know his previous history. We don't know if any other citizens had interactions with this officer that could provide any kind of perspective on how we got here today.
Walton is calling for body camera footage to be released immediately.
It's important to point out the gap in time between Takaya's killing and the release of the body camera footage. That footage can be released whenever they're ready. There should be an urgency to releasing that footage, and we don't quite understand the delay.
The family describes Young as the family party girl and a prankster.
She was family-oriented. She was like a fireball.
And they're calling on Blendon Township police to take swift action and release the video of her death.
But the family is suffering and they are in pain while that delay is taking place. Justice delayed is justice denied.
5 days after the body camera video of the shooting death of Takaya Young was released, her family is speaking out.
I felt sick. Just made me real sick because I raised her. And to see her life end like that, brutally, and take 2 lives like that, it was so sick feeling us.
Nadine Young, Takaya's grandmother, says there needs to be accountability.
Saying that Takaya deserved justice is an understatement.
Family attorney Sean Walton pointed to the video released last week and the Blendon Township use of force policy. That policy reads in part, in regards to a vehicle, when feasible, officers should take reasonable steps to move out of the path of an approaching vehicle instead of discharging their firearm at the vehicle or any of its occupants. An officer should only discharge a firearm at a moving vehicle or its occupants when that officer reasonably believes there are no other reasonable means that are available to avert the imminent threat of the vehicle. Walton says that threshold was not met.
Officer Grubb, instead of moving out of the way, further centers himself and leans forward and places the gun further towards Takaya, again, with no provocation. So at this point, Officer Grubb has no reason to have his gun out. He has no reason to use deadly force.
I also reached out to Blendon Township Police Chief John Belford. He said their department's use of force review board will review the evidence to determine if the officer acted within policy. But that review will not begin until the state completes its investigation and shares its findings. The family now waiting for that to happen, including Young's 2 children.
We just got to be the village for them because they're going to miss her.
Body camera footage released today from the deadly shooting at Kroger in Blendon Township last Thursday.
This comes 8 days after 21-year-old Takaya Young was shot in the store parking lot on Sunbury Road. Young was pregnant when she was shot and also leaves behind 2 children.
The first officer to interact with Takaya Young approaches her car under the suspicion that she stole liquor from Kroger.
Hey, stop. Hey, out of the car. Out of the car.
By the time the second officer gets to the car and walks in front of it, the first officer had asked Young to get out 5 times. He keeps asking. Young argues. You can hear the exchange on that officer's body-worn camera.
Out of the car.
For what?
Out of the car.
For what?
They said you stole stuff, do not leave. Get out of the car. Then get out. No, then get out. Get out of the car.
Young begins to drive. In this freeze frame, you can see the car make contact with the officer standing at the front of the car as his feet leave the ground. That is when that officer fires 1 shot through the windshield. We've paused the video to not show that deadly shot. When we pick up the video a moment later, you can hear the commands continue. The car rolls through the parking lot, stopping under the awning by the store. The video ends with officers busting the driver's side window to get Young out of the car.
Family identified the officer involved as Connor Grubb, and it's a photo of Officer Grubb from the department's Facebook page. Grubb has been on the force since 2019.
And we want to turn.
I would love to sit up here and say, like, we can reform this system, but we've been making the reforms after every single death, and nothing is changing. We say more training. You know, we fund these police stations, and we go, yeah, more training is the right answer. Training is not the answer in this case. That officer was trained correctly and still messed up. There has to be accountability on that police officer and on the police station itself.
Executive Vice President of the FOP Lodge 9, Brian Steele, started off today's news conference saying the body camera video is hard to watch. He said when an officer walks up to a car, one of the first things they do is look for license plates. He said there were no tags on the car Young was in and pointed out when the officer stepped in front of the car, it was parked. He also called this heartbreaking and says the entire incident needs to be looked at, not just how it ended.
Now, I understand much of the public might be wondering why even bother with allegations of shoplifting. There's no real punishment for here anyway in Franklin County, so why shouldn't the officer just let her go? Officers have a legal duty to act. They have a legal duty to act when they are alerted to a crime.